So thank you for joining us this evening or this morning, wherever you happen to be. And we're really appreciative, really truly appreciative of people coming together this first Wednesday of the month, each month. Those of you who can make it and others watching after the fact. But it has been such a bizarre year and a half. And being able to connect with all of you is wonderful. And then being able to connect afterwards when we talk and answer questions, etc., is a real joy for Richard and me as well. So we really appreciate you joining us. This evening's talk is on Samadhi. And when we were discussing, hey, what could we do this time? And when Richard came up with that idea, I was like, oh, God, because Samadhi is one of those things. It's like Mulabandha, where you think, was that it? Like you burp or something and you think, was that Mulabandha or was that Samadhi? Or
it's a big word.
It's a big word. And yet it's a fascinating word. And as we were getting ready for the talk, I was remembering this friend of mine from 35 years ago, who was this wonderful person who was a marathon runner from Memphis, Tennessee, where I was running a restaurant. I guess it was 45 years ago. And, he would run all the time and come into the restaurant and then eat. And he was also a house painter. And this one time in this southern drawl, he came to me and he said, well, I know you do yoga. And he said, I'm just wondering, when I'm out there running sometimes, I just get this feeling. And I don't know what it is. Is it Samadhi? And I kind of just didn't say anything. And he said, I kind of get the same feeling after I've been painting houses for a while, too. And I've been wondering if it's the fumes or is it Samadhi?
Different techniques.
Yeah, different techniques. So that's always kind of been where I've rested with the notion of, am I in Samadhi ever? So thanks to my friend Barry Hood.
Oh, Barry. Okay. So we're going to talk about basically two ways of looking at it. And we all look at it from at least two ways. And the first one we'll look at is where Samadhi in the Hatha Pradipika, which is a book that you're all studying every day. Samadhi is considered to be Raja Yoga, the ultimate. Many have copies, even in their hands. And it's something, and the final verse of the Hatha Pradipika is that until the prana has gone into your central channel, and you actually, everything becomes transparent with joy. All of the talk is just the nonsensical babbling of a crazy person. And yet we talk about it all the time. And so, and the Hatha Pradipika is more modern, it's classical Hatha Yoga, maybe 12th, 13th century. And everyone likes to think, have I gotten to Samadhi yet? And it's also a term for Raja Yoga, which means royal yoga. And any yoga that is done totally correctly and you end up in Samadhi, they call Raja Yoga. And so then the rest of the book actually is always drawing equivalents. So Samadhi is the same thing as Shunyata. It's the same thing as Kundalini. Samadhi is the same thing as Raja Yoga or Tattva Vidhi, or all of these different terms for I get it. But a lot of the terms, technically, from different practices and things, are not identical, but they're similar enough that it makes you want to talk to, those other people. And so Samadhi is, in the Hatha Pradipika, considered to be the goal and is the final goal. And if you haven't experienced it and are in that state of the present moment, then what are you talking about? And yet, here we are talking about it. And so it's treated as a goal, and then when you start to look at the fourth chapter of Hatha Pradipika, it's again starts out all about Samadhi, and it's again making that equivalent. It's the ultimate, and if you even have to ask, you're not having that experience. It is the understanding of the complete union of the Jivatman and the Paramatman.
Which are?
Oh, Jivatman. Jiva means, the Jivatman is considered to be the individual Atman. Whoever you ultimately are as you is the Jivatman. And the Paramatman, it means the other or the supreme. And that's the beloved, who is in the hearts of all beings. And what happens, though, in the Samadhi is that there's no distinction anymore. Mm-hmm. So this is what we talk about all the time in the Gita, is that you become...
We lost it. We're back.
I think we're back.
Now it looks like they're gone.
No, we're here.
I think we're back.
Are you back?
Are we back?
That was the cyber version.
That's Samadhi. We were doing a demo of Samadhi. Except if you had been in our presence, we weren't in Samadhi. Zoom was in Samadhi. We were stressed out. But here we go.
They call that Kala Danda.
Yeah.
Which means the stoppage of time. So all of time and space is suspended in Kala Danda. And so what Hatha Pradipika does is it draws this, and then all of a sudden it goes back and it starts talking, as you read through the fourth chapter, about all of these different levels of Samadhi. Now, wait a minute. And different levels of attainment. There's the stage of just being a pot, and then there's, the stage of finally what they call nishpati, or that's finally the true Samadhi. But they then take you back and they say, oh, and by the way, there are all these different levels. And so then, and each level then you have to keep practicing. And then once you get to the next level, keep practicing again. And finally, if you get to the next level, then you're okay. And so, for example, in the body, they'll have you meditate initially on what they call the, some on the earth, that which we all share. And so this would be the pelvic floor, and this is where the Brahma Granthi is. So it's the first of the knots that you have to work your way through, both in terms of your samskaras and in terms of your relationships with and your perception of other beings. They always, and so some texts say, well, the Brahma Nadi is in the Muladhara chakra, way down in the pelvic floor. And then there are other texts which consider themselves correct, that actually it's here is where you start. And this is, so the Brahma Granthi is here, and then the Vishnu Granthi is here, and then the Rudra Granthi is back between the eyes. But in all of those different stages of Samadhi, you haven't gotten it yet. Keep going. And then finally, if you go way back and up, and then you open up the the nectar channel of the central channel, and then, oh, by the way, that's actually samadhi. And so, but they're kind of pulling you along. And so this is a good technique we've talked about, where you create something like a little beautiful bubble or a promise. Oh, if only I had samadhi, then I would be happy. Probably true. And then but you then kind of wrap it in something that somebody wants, like, want to be happy? Try this. And so then people reach for the bauble, or they reach for the mantra, or the religious teaching, and then you just pull it a little bit along and trick people into like, oh, I want that.
And you do it to yourself. I mean, that's a technique because we get attached to the idea of something like samadhi, and then it becomes static. And then because it's a static idea. And so if we can even learn to do that, sort of tempting oneself to ourselves and watch the progression happen, then, there's I don't think in terms of samadhi you'd really call it progress necessarily, maybe.
Well, they'll turn around and they'll say, yeah, you have to
Yeah.
make progress towards this. And this is the book that's, kind of just get into your central channel, the kundalini, and you've got it. But you've got to do all these practices. And starting, of course, in the first chapter with good posture. Okay. As we straighten up. And then all of the things that come with that, the pranayama, and then mudra and bandha, which are, again, different levels of practice. And then finally, the chapter on Raja Yoga and Samadhi. But it's a very confusing thing. And in more modern yoga, because Samadhi is considered to be the goal, or the kundalini and the central channel of the central channel. That's what we learned. It's just like you've got to get into the central channel and then look again, because there are central channels inside the central channel that are much more subtle. And then you finally, the heart opens and there's this complete samadhi in which there's nothing to reach for because there's such satisfaction. So in that final samadhi, you don't have to get rid of thinking, which you might believe from some of the stages of practice with that. You don't have to get rid of anything. All experience is this experience of emptiness, or they call it shunya ashunya. It's empty, it's not empty. Just do it. Mm-hmm. Then we want to contrast that modern approach where we're tempted to say, and of course, if you want to become a famous yogi, you say, oh, I achieved samadhi, I'm in samadhi all the time. And what you get from that is a lot of not only people who babble nonsense, but you get a lot of people who are faking it. In other words, they're not really looking honestly at what they're doing. And so then we flip over to the older tradition of the Yoga Sutra, which is based in that mysterious philosophical system, Sankhya. And it interprets Sankhya in a beautiful way, which, of course, Mary and I believe to be highly Buddhist in its vocabulary and reference, but we'll have to study and see. And so the book starts out easy with that yoga is chitta vritti nirodha. And you just go, and so chitta, of course, is mind, and vrittis are all the different patternings or the spinnings, and you get all these different types of spinnings that you've probably experienced. And nirodha, often translated as suppression or stopping. I always love to translate it as suspension, because that's not as dualistic. So if I have to stop my mind, you got to get a stopper in there. The true witness gets mad at the impermanence of all these silly vrittis and just tries to beat them down. And there are actually yoga practitioners who are like that. And so they're, and maybe they get a little something from that, but then as the Yoga Sutra then starts on to explain, you have to keep going, and you have to go back and deal with the samskaras from the techniques that you use.
And so the idea of suspension rather than stopping is, a process, and it allows you to then really truly go back and start over again and again. Whereas if you stop it, it's sort of like if you've ever been in the car with someone who's a bad driver and
Stop.
they keep putting their foot on the gas and taking off as you're driving down the highway. And that's kind of what happens if you are trying to stop the chittavrittis. Instead of holding them, and this is one of the reasons we call the Yoga Sutra a sort of Buddhist style text, it's that you hold them in suspension with great tenderness and kindness rather than just being repelled from them.
Yeah, with what they call samadhi.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I never get there. I'm too busy holding it.
You're too busy being nice. Yeah. And so the
samskaras, is that what you were talking about?
Oh, the samskaras.
Did I interrupt that? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And so what we have, of course, to get rid of the different vrittis, which pretty much include all of your experience, or the mind tries to take all experience and through the process of vritting, reduces it to symbols or ideas. And so we remember that avidya, or ignorance, is really to get nama and rupa, or the name of something, and the actual thing in and of itself confused. And so rupa, or the swarupa, is the true form, and that doesn't mean it actually has a form that can be grasped, but it just means the true nature of something. And then what the chitta does is magically creates a name for it, and this is where people often get confused, and they think of, well, in what language? And then they go, oh, my language, in Sanskrit, that's what the name is. But actually, any kind of symbol or code is very powerful. And so there are languages that I have a number of animal friends who live around, and they don't speak, they don't have spoken language, but sometimes they'll just make a grunt or, and that can mean so much. And so if I can label an experience, or I can label the experience of my experience with extremely subtle markers or indicators, and this is just code. That's what, computer science bit, it's code. And so it could be the subtlest thing. And so in Yoga Sutra, we start to go into different layers of the different things that bring us into our momentary taste of samadhi. And so they have what they call sampragyata samadhi. And these are samadhis that have accompanying the taste, the little taste of awesome suspension, where you just let everything shine or let everything go. And that, of course, you know what I'm talking about, is wrapped up with the techniques and the technically religious things that you were using to help you focus your mind so that you could see through the mind. And so one of the things that they focus on is called vitarka. And vitarka is, although they give an example later in Yoga Sutra of suffering from vitarka, it just means good thinking, in which you're inquiring philosophically or logically, oh, that, therefore that. And so, it's experiencing that the mind thinks dialectically. And this is an extremely important tool that I think we should all cultivate, because occasionally it's useful, particularly yoga people. But I would recommend it to a lot of people today in the world. Try a little vitarka. And so you get what they call savitarka, sampragyata, and they use initially the term sampragyat, which means a collection that is giving a taste of samadhi, but you often instantly get it confused. And so then you will get what is called nirvitarka, which is an example of what they call asamprika. Oh, that's samadhi. Nirvitarka samadhi is like you've slipped and all of a sudden you're stunned in that nirodha or that samadhi. And it often won't last very long, okay?
And the naming process
Very quickly.
disappears when you've slipped, and then immediately.
Yeah, it's like falling. Yeah, and of course my favorite old image is you're in the forest and there's a little creek that's just wide enough for you to hop from one side to the other, but it's a little bit wet and muddy, and so you're hopping down the creek in this dialectic, and then you hit its slippery slope, which, because so many of the dialectics are based in little tricks, particularly in something like Sankhya, where there's self-reference paradox, or in the different schools. Any metaphysical school or religious school is based in self-reference paradox. And so you eventually slip, that's the way it's designed, and you fall into the creek, but then soon enough you wash up on the bank, because you're carrying with you all of this embodiment in the form of samskaras. And so we go through that, and we get to, so once we are in a trance and then we slip, we have that taste, we might emerge, if on a more subtle level, vichara, which is that question, it is the same thing, but it's on a level of simply finding that level of the mind that keeps looking. In other words, if a linguistic answer appears, the mind is just like ignores, let me keep looking. And this is like when you're fascinated with something, and you're just asking the question, who am I? For example, is the classical vichara from the Upanishads, who am I? And the mind will answer, oh, you are Richard, you're the lion heart. And then, but you've already heard that so many times, you ask again, who am I? And then any answer that comes, you just go, who, or what, and you do it with that. And that more subtle level leads to nirvichara, which is considered a very deep and subtle taste. And so what's happening is that what is being taught in the what are those final limbs of the abhyasa, vairagyam is our initial technique, but then we get to the Eightfold Path and the dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So dharana just means to focus. How do you focus your mind, particularly if there's stuff that either you really covet in the form of samadhi or liberation, or more honestly, you really are sick of the way your body feels, or you're actually just upset about something, or so it could be any of these things. And so the dharana is basically a religious trick in which the mind has already created some sort of holy space or holy word. We're all familiar with holy words or holy mountains. They're very good. Holy images. And these might not be traditional because all of the different habitual have these days people end up cursing a lot. You hear it on the street, and they say and these curse words are actually mantras. Okay, not very good mantras, but they invoke a chain of thought. All like it's all conspiracies. Okay, and then I use a couple of choice curse words, which are mantras. Okay, and then that reawakens the feelings that I get from, all of the different news I read or something. But that is actually religious stuff. Mm-hmm. And so all of us, we are, by nature, we have what is called Shraddha, that which we place our faith in. And it doesn't have to be traditional faith. It could be all kinds of habitual patterns of thinking or all. So we all use dharana, but dharana cannot lead to dhyana without the actual help of, perhaps a teacher, or the good luck of going out in nature and an owl comes up to you and says, "Who?" asking you who you are. All kinds of things, but you actually end up with help, not necessarily external, that then allows you to get into the state of meditation or dhyana. And this is where you start to actually look and you see in the holy space that it merges with its background into its immediate context, which then makes you step back and give space to it. And then that context has context into the experience of infinity, that you're actually experiencing interconnectedness. And then you fall, not through technique, and with that holy mountain, all of a sudden, again, you slip and you have that experience of samadhi. That makes sense? So the interesting thing is human beings, and the Upanishads define humans this way. Human beings are Shraddha. We trust, we place our faith and trust often in stuff that we shouldn't. But that's what we do. Because we're not omniscient in the sense we don't have knowledge of every detail of superficial experience. And so we just have to say, this is the way it is. I'll take and you just go around reinforcing it, imagining it. It could be a conspiracy theory.
And so when we get stuck in dharana, in focusing and defining, it becomes this closed process. And it becomes the root for habitual patterning, behaviors, etc., and derails the entire project. And it's a natural occurrence in this sort of process that we've been talking about of sort of gradually working one's way towards samadhi. But because of the mind needing to know, and because of just how easy it is to fall into habitual patterns of thought and behavior and perception and interpretation of perception, it is very, very easy to get stuck in that first stage of dharana. And that's why it's so important to have feedback from friends, from community, from traditions, to go to different teachers, but to have root teachers and root friends that you can really honestly examine these experiences with, because the tendency is to see samadhi as this goal and therefore misinterpret something somewhere along the way as being samadhi, or the path towards samadhi, or whatever.
An interesting Yoga Sutra is the word kaivalyam, which means just thatness. People think is a very lonely state because finally and they're thinking of I as this little ego story, the story of the little me, am alone because this whole universe is just a terrible place. I don't want to be here. And so there's actually that craving, and it's rooted in a deep anger and dislike for the truth of impermanence. It's kind of sad. And so the dhyana stage is when you're starting to get these little tastes of like, oh, it all makes sense. But to get stuck in the dhyana stage, one can become a religious fanatic, and there are just too many examples of someone with religious motivation might have great courage and will do something really because God approves of them, or their teacher approves of them. And so this is why the Yoga Sutra goes on to say that they start talking about what you can do in order to actually get to the state of nirvichara, asampragyata samadhi, and they say you can try this, and they always end these sentences with the word va, or. You can surrender to Ishvara, and so, but Ishvara, which is almost always translated as God, even though it means the beloved more literally, or that which is pleasing. So it could be a teacher, and then the teacher. So they say the actual Ishvara is the teacher of all teachers. So it's the beloved in the heart of all teachers. So even the Bodhisattva has all beings in their heart. So you get that connect with Ishvara, and this is one way. And then they say that, and it'll give you that experience of connection to all other beings. And so that'll take you into the samadhi. And then they say even the sound pavana, which is often translated as om, but I like to translate it as simply the hum that all sound becomes. Like if you say, you know what I mean. And sometimes om is too sectarian. So they're, particularly in certain places in Asia, they don't want to hear the word om. So we just go, and hence the practice of Brahmari, or the sound where you do long exhalations, making the sound of a honeybee, which is a very sacred teacher. Okay, some of your best gurus can sting you that way. And so but if what happens then, if obstacles arise, and this is the Yoga Sutra is that if obstacles arise like sickness or becoming dumbfounded or even confused, there are all of these different obstacles, all the way through health problems, and then mental problems and problems of ignorance. Or on the physical level, if the next set are, they say you might even have to start breathing or panting, and these confusion. If any of these arise, you can do this practice. And so it's no longer that you have to do a theistic or Ishvara practice. It's now the practice of Maitri or Metta. Maitri, Karuna. Yeah. And so and this is a way of relating to other beings, And it really gets back or down into the samskaras. And so, but if you don't want to try that, you could try exhaling. So they start to teach pranayama to you. And then you think, oh, that's totally different. I don't like this metta practice, where I have to be, friendly when there's happiness, and I have to be compassionate, or I have to be, have sympathetic joy with those who are really wise and happy, or I have to be, just give them space if they're apunya or rascals. And so we think, can't deal with that. I'll just exhale, hold the breath, and then what happens then is you become extremely grounded in prana. And so they start teaching pranayama, or they teach you then different levels, or just the senses themselves. And so people get confused. Is the sensation I'm having prana? And of course, technically it is. It's spanda shakti. But because we have a preconception of what spanda shakti looks like, it's not quite glittery enough, or that isn't really prana, that's just a pain in my nose. Okay. And so we because of our preconceptions, we don't actually recognize what's arising in the present moment. That couldn't be it. What arises in the present moment is supposed to be super, like clear light, and that just looks like my foot, or and again, and so they'll take you through all of these different practices. And the beautiful thing is they say, try this, or, try this. You don't like that? Try this. And then finally, they get to the point where you are able to drop in to samadhi, and then they think, now that you've done that, now you can take it to the extremely small or the extremely big, or you can take it everywhere. And so you now have the tool of the Yoga Sutra. And so samadhi is actually presented as being the method rather than the goal in the Yoga Sutra. And so I'm going to take, now that I've had this taste, I'm going to take this practice of samadhi to things that are very, very tiny. And so if you're a physicist or a biologist, or you can get into like little teeny things, or you can take it to very big things like galaxies or galaxy clusters, or in between things. You can even take it to your hand and your foot, or all of it is endlessly fascinating. And so you're given permission. You can meditate, or you can try this technique of dharana, dhyana, samadhi on anything that you like. I mean, what a generous book. And that's what the yoga tradition is actually asking people, find that which gives you that sense of nirodha.
So it's a sense of absorption. So anything that you can become absorbed in for even an instant gives you that taste. And so we've all had these little tastes, and then we either ignore them or think, no, that's not it. If we have seen samadhi as more of a goal, or rather than this thing Richard talked about in the very beginning of this sort of meditative quality that resides in the core of the heart, or resides in the very lowest chakras, that where we meditate deeply on the breath, on the central channel, or just on something preferably that we don't really even name. Because where we start running into the problem and coming out of the samadhi is, and I mean, this is theoretical for me, but is when you start to name things, which if you have an agile mind, you think, well, this is good. I've got an agile mind.
We're pretty quick with it.
Yeah, I'm pretty quick with it, and I can do that.
And remember, the
pretty
name
well.
doesn't have to be a spoken language. The name could be
Anything.
any indicator.
Recognition of any sort.
Yeah,
Yeah.
anything.
And so defining this difference between absorption and recognition that that stops the process. And absorption is something that sort of you disappear and your experience disappears. And we've all had the taste of, and that's, from my understanding, what the text is looking at.
Yeah, it's that slipping. So there's what were those verses?
Do you want to look at those verses? I think it was 49. Yeah. In chapter 1 of the Yoga Sutra, verse 49, 50, and 51.
Oh, right. Yeah. So this is a nice translation from a very nice man. You'll have to focus.
Pandit Rajmani.
Yeah. Because intuitive wisdom, which is pragya, contains the meaning or essence of and then they use the word vishesha artha. Vishesha artha. It has a different scope from the knowledge gained from scriptures or inference. Okay, and it could be our own unique pattern of scriptures, being embodied beings, or inference is like the study of, good, clear thinking. But what arises is called vishesha, which means particular residue. And this is again, we've just stumbled into the paradox, which is that any system that you consider to be the truth or the whole has a self-reference paradox that it's sitting on. It's sitting on itself. And so if I find the bag of all bags, and of course if you've ever recycled, you'll know about, I've got to put my plastic bags in a plastic bag. And so ultimately you'll have a bag of bags, but I want to be complete. And so the bag of bags cannot be placed into itself. You try, and you end up with a mess usually. And so that which conceptually is to include everything, like the term God, or the term Purusha, or the term Prakriti, or the term Shunya, or Ashunya, or Kundalini, any term you come up with, emptiness, cannot contain itself within the world of Chitta. And so it ends up, so that which is arising in the present moment, if slips out of any category, so the finer and more honed the meditation technique is, you'll start to slip because it cannot contain itself. And so, and what happens is in that slipping, the mind doesn't know which way to go. Okay, and of course there are the stories of, say, the Adityas who are, of the fire sacrifice, where you want to offer in the fire sacrifice, you're sacrificing whatever. Modern sacrifices, are nonviolent, so you put nice things in there. But the idea is that you're giving to all beings, you're giving to the environment, you're giving to the planet Earth, and the more it is that act of giving, and then finally you say, I want to give everything, which I want to give me. And so what happens is that there's always a residue in a fire sacrifice, and in Orthodox practices, they go around and they try to collect all the residue, anything which turns out to be the fire sacrifice itself, the ground that the fire pit is built on. And so they would play with this paradox that most sacrifices being not wise left a lot of residue. And so the shesha is that which slips out of the desired category or the metaphysical category. And it just means same thing as apana. Shesha is what's the German word that's similar? Shesha. Yeah. So that's that's the root of that word. It's the stuff that is left over. You can't categorize it. And so it slips out. But the Yoga Sutra is saying, oh, that is the Vishesha. That is the ultimate, this present moment. What you're experiencing is irreducible. It is particular. You can't reduce it to, oh, it's just like all the other moments I've had. Anything, any category you throw it into, it is so slimy that it slips right out, like a noodle of infinity. And so that's a wonderful thing. Now, so we've gotten to that point where we're actually able to become stunned at that which is unique. And then, so we're now in this samadhi, and then it says, samskaras that are born of this, they don't even say what this is anymore because you can't reduce it to another concept or thought or make a deity out of it. Samskaras born of this cancel all other samskaras. Okay, so the samskara is technically the residue, and so if you're able to have that appreciation of what is actually arising in the present moment, and you're stunned, that cancels all other samskaras. But then, very clever, upon cancellation of even that, everything else is canceled. And this is nirbija samadhi. So the definition of samadhi is you're canceling even any samskara, which could be have anything to do with space and time or the storylines, even that you're a bodhisattva or a paramatman or anything. All of that is vishesha. And so you keep practicing. So that's interesting. Yoga Sutra is interesting. Until you get to the very end, and I'll jump to the end. There's a kind of samadhi called Dharma Mega Samadhi, which is a uniquely Buddhist term. In fact, if you go looking through Upanishads and texts, you won't find the term Dharma Mega. And many commentators on the Yoga Sutra cannot refuse to mention Buddhists because they're considered those people, In fact, I've met a lot of Orthodox Brahmins who were very good in their religious faith, and they just never communicated with the Buddhists. They were afraid. But if they saw a Buddhist, they had to immediately go and take a bath, preferably in cold water, because that would bring you back to your senses. So that's the politics that has gone, every 100 years or so it flips. So those, because they're so good, those others, we can't deal with them. And so politics has gone on. It's silly. But Dharma Mega means the cloud of Dharma. And Dharma's, it's a pretty big word, Dharma. But all the Dharmas are then seen as they are arising in the present moment. They are the Vishesha, the totality, this fizz of endless numbers of dharmas or theories, religions, not only our earthly religions, but religions from other planets and other galaxies, other universes, if there are any, or other species. All of that is to be released, and in that releasing, then you come to Kaivalyam, or defined in the last verse. And then as they're defining Kaivalyam, in which all of the gunas of Prakriti, they've done their thing, and so they just flow back into themselves, and it sounds like a wonderful thing. And then it says, Va, or if you don't like that, Chitti Shakti Riti. It's just Chitti Shakti, that, which is again then a reference to the deeper understanding of Sankhya, that everything you're experiencing is this Chitti Shakti. It is this vibrance, pure Shakti. And the self-reference paradox, of course, of Sankhya is that everything you experience, you can't experience Purusha. Purusha is not a thing, it's not a person. You can make idols and images, symbols, but it's only just Chitti Shakti, which happens to be identical or non-different from Shakti, which is Prakriti, Daivi Prakriti. And so it's kind of a fun thing.
And that last verse really emphasizes why the translation of the Chittavritti Nirodha as suspension is a really good way of translating that, because it is a process of opening rather than a process of freedom and a process of spaciousness. It's a process rather than something that you can define. When you suspend something, you are simply present with it and truly engaging in, if you're lucky,
Well, there's no
engaging,
you. Yeah.
engaging
Again,
in this
anything you
sense
say
of total
runs.
absorption.
Yeah. It's
So
awesome.
you've disappeared.
Awesome is the modern word for it.
It's the California word.
Yeah.
So
And that's just your breath taken
Yeah.
away.
so we really, it's a fascinating subject, the idea of samadhi, and let it sink in. Let your ideas about it and your experiences of things that might have been tastes of it, let that sort of sink into the nervous system when those moments arise, and if those moments arise, and notice how quickly all of us tend to name things, to define things, and then how the party's over at that point, and the joy really starts to become dull. So to me, it's a very wonderful way of talking about samadhi as opposed to the Hatha Pradipika, where it is this goal. I personally am able to relate a little more to the Yoga Sutra because it is a process, and it is something that will take lifetimes. And so that's the good news, rather than a goal, which, if you get it this lifetime, then
I'm out of here.
you're out of here, and then that's not
See you later.
that's not very bodhisattva-ish of you. So anyway, we encourage you to keep practicing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to slip back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Which, according to this, is the present moment. That everything starts in the present moment.
So thank you for joining us with this. For those of you who are here this evening, we will turn the recording off and then have time for questions and answers. And we appreciate you joining us. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.